The Last Word with Jonathan Capehart in for Lauren starts right now. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Jen, you got to be rather quick. I hope you didn't see me adjusting my jacket to make sure my tie was perfectly in place.
I can tell people I see you in person and you always look this put together, which is grating for all of us, but you are right up there in the fashionistas in the office. So there you go.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Look at you looking glam in all white. Thank you very much, Jen. Have a good weekend.
Have a good show. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you. Well, on day 133 of Donald Trump's war on Iran, Donald Trump once again declared that the U.S.-Iran ceasefire is over. In a social media post this morning, Donald Trump said that Iran has, quote, asked us to continue talks. We have agreed to do so, but the United States has stated to them in no uncertain terms that the ceasefire is over, exclamation point, all caps. Now, stop me if you've heard this before, but an Iranian government official has told MS Now that Iran has not agreed to continue talks with the United States, despite Trump's claim, and they would only continue when the U.S. stops violating the ceasefire. Donald Trump's post comes after the U.S. and Iran traded retaliatory strikes this week, the largest escalation in fighting since both sides signed that memorandum of understanding last month. The New York Times reports the targets hit this week include air defense systems, drone and missile storage sites, and military speedboats along the southern coast of Iran near the Strait of Hormuz, a critical commercial shipping lane that has become a focus of recent fighting. U.S. forces also appeared to hit a railway bridge in northeastern Iran more than 700 miles from the strait. Online video verified by the New York Times showed several people inspecting a crater at the site. Current and former U.S. commanders and Pentagon officials said the strikes were a clear escalation as the United States and Iran appeared to edge closer to a return to full-scale war. This is what Donald Trump said when asked if the United States is returning to a full-scale war with Iran.
Are we returning to a full-scale military conflict, sir?
Trump's war in Iran overshadowed the NATO summit in Turkey, but Trump still had plenty of time to inflict his ignorance on the world's largest alliance. Perhaps no moment was more striking than this one. Trump appeared with NATO Secretary Mark Rutte, where he, true to form, criticized NATO and lashed out at NATO allies. A Danish reporter then asked NATO Secretary Rutte this question.
Mark, you sit next to Donald Trump in moments where he talks about conquering Greenland, talks about lashing out at allies like Spain, starting trade wars, things that it doesn't seem like the old Mark Rutte would approve of. Does this have any effect on your self-respect when you sit next to him like that and say nothing?
Dang. Does this have any effect on your self-respect when you sit next to him like that and say nothing? Just imagine for a moment if any Trump enabler had been asked that question at any time since 2016, when Marco Rubio was calling Donald Trump a con man and J.D. Vance was comparing Trump to Hitler. Does it have any effect on your self-respect to now sit there silently? Here's how Mark Rutte answered.
Does this have any effect on your self-respect when you sit next to him like that and say nothing?
You know, what I always do is acknowledge when praise is due, and I think we should praise Donald Trump for the fact that NATO is so much stronger.
It is possible Rutte means Donald Trump unites NATO like Russia unites NATO in defense against him. That might be too generous. It has too often been the reaction around Trump. People enable him and accommodate him. You know, I have never forgotten this passage from reporter Joshua Green in his 2017 book, Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency, about how Trump learned he could get away with it. Trump, who has an uncanny ability to read an audience, intuited in the spring of 2011 that the birth calumny could help him forge a powerful connection with party activists. He also figured out that the norms forbidding such behavior were not inviolable rules that carried a harsh penalty, but rather sentiments of a nobler bygone era, gossamer thin and needlessly adhered to by politicians who lacked his willingness to defy them. He could violate them with impunity and pay no price for it. In fact, he discovered Republican voters thrilled to his provocations and rewarded him. Privately, what amused him the most, he later told a friend, was that no party official in a position of power dared to stand up to him. In his first nationally televised interview on C-SPAN, the new chairman of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus, was confronted about Trump's possible candidacy and his birther attacks on Obama. Quote, "Is the birther debate good for the party?" Jeff Zeleny, a reporter for the New York Times, asked him. "I think all these guys are credible," Priebus replied, looking slightly nauseated. "I mean, I think it's up to the primary voters to decide that. I mean, obviously, people are going to have different opinions, and, you know, you're going to have a lot of different candidates that are running. They're going to talk about different things at different times. I think having a diversity of opinion is fine." The lesson Trump took away was that the party gatekeepers, who were privately appalled at his behavior and did not want him in the race, would pose no threat to him at all if he decided to run. With Donald Trump currently failing at a war he's claimed to have ended, he's now presenting himself as a possible martyr of the war he started. In an interview with the New York Post, Trump said that he, quote, "has left instructions should Iran succeed in their plots to assassinate him, and there'll be hell to pay. I've been on their list for a long time. That's what we're dealing with," he said. "The only thing is, I've left instructions, if anything happens, to just literally bomb them at levels that they've never seen before." Let's separate that bombastic rhetoric from reality, shall we? The President of the United States receives extraordinary protection from the Secret Service, and the U.S. military operates exclusively through established law and, importantly, the constitutional chain of command, which would have a new commander-in-chief, not through revenge instructions left behind. Based on his war in Iran, it would appear Trump is not very good at waging or winning wars. So he's undertaking more renovation projects, although it doesn't seem he's very good at those either. Trump has made the nation's capital a complete mess. Trust me, I know, I live there. Today, Trump announced that another construction project is underway at the White House. Quote, "The base of the magnificent White House face around the column area at its front door, it hasn't been fixed in decades, but you can see how beautiful it will soon be. This is representative of what we're doing in Washington, D.C. Beautification and no crime. People are saying that the city hasn't been or felt like this in 100 years. You didn't hear that from me. Scaffolding is up, and tarps are now covering the iconic stone columns of the North Portico. Trump's UFC fight has severely destroyed the grass on the White House South Lawn and the ellipse. And the tarp is still up at the Kennedy Center after Donald Trump's name was ordered removed from the building by a federal judge. The tarp remains there even after Trump lost in court again this week to stop the removal of his name. That lawsuit was filed by our next guest, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. In a statement on Wednesday, Congresswoman Beatty said, quote, "Today's ruling again affirms that this administration's efforts to rename the Kennedy Center were unlawful. His name no longer desecrates this sacred memorial which belongs to the American people. Now it is time for the Trump administration to accept this, comply with the law, and take the tarps down." Donald Trump took a lesson from the moment Josh Green details in his book. Nobody was going to stop him, certainly not with rare exceptions in the Republican Party. But there's another Trump dynamic at work. It's not just that there is a lot of scandal and outrage, it's that there is so much of it that they become impossible to track all at once. Every day brings another announcement or distraction. Trump sprays a fire hose of daily nonsense to his political advantage. But when a person ignores the chaos and stays focused on just one thing, it works. E. Jean Carroll's pursuit of her $5 million judgment Donald Trump owes her after a jury found him liable of sexual abuse and defamation. And a toy maker and wine importer who took their fight against Trump's tariffs to the Supreme Court and won. And Congresswoman Beatty's dogged determination to save the Kennedy Center from his clutches. What does saving the country from Trump look like? It's refusing to sit by silently and clawing it back from Trump, one thing at a time. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio, an ex officio member of the Kennedy Center's Board of Trustees. Congresswoman Beatty, let's just make this a weekly thing. It's nice to see you again. As I mentioned, a federal appeals court denied Trump's request to stop the removal of his name from the Kennedy Center. What does this latest win mean practically?
Well, it's a good win. And again, let me say thank you. I enjoy our Friday nights together. And here we are. It's another win this week. It says that we have the justice system working for us. And that's what we want to convey back to the American people, because he took it before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and they rejected him. He actually filed to try to put his name back on the building, which, as you know, we've been successful in all of our lawsuits, and we were able to get his name removed from the Kennedy Center. And so we're very pleased with this. We're going to continue to fight for this because we have justice on our side, and it's unlawful. And clearly, this sends a strong message, I believe, of hope to the American people. While we're doing this for the Kennedy Center, we're also sending a message that we're going to fight for the American people, whether that's for our voting rights, whether that's for the economy or housing, and so many other people.
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman, you told the New York Times that you were inspired to wage the legal battle out of a desire to protect the civil rights legacy of President John F. Kennedy. Talk more about what motivated you to decide to fight Trump on this.
Well, I think it's important for us to practice what we preach every day. Members who are leaders, members who are members of the United States Congress, we always talk about standing up and representing people and protecting the law. So I was motivated, one, because I was muted and he was trying to take away my voice, and our voices are our power. I was also motivated because of all of the things during the era of time that John F. Kennedy was our president, what he stood for, making sure that we had opportunities. He met with Black members of Congress. He stood up for equal rights. And after his assassination, we were able to go in right after his presidency and get voting rights and civil rights. And I think we have to remind the generation today of that because we're still fighting for these same things. We have a president who wouldn't pass a bipartisan housing bill unless he got his SAVE Act, which is a voter suppression bill. So we're still fighting for the same things that we were fighting for in 1963, 64, and 65. And so that has inspired me to continue to fight. And if we're going to try to make a difference, we have to stand up to, yes, even the president of the United States when he's doing something unlawful.
Congresswoman, when do you expect the tarp to be removed from the Kennedy Center?
Well, another thing that we've been victorious on in just this week, the judges reiterated that this month, July 31st, we have to have the response from the administration on, one, the TARP coming down, and two, a very clear plan for how we're going to continue to have programs and operate the Kennedy Center.
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman, one more question for you before we're out of time. A Danish reporter, I played it in the intro, asked the NATO secretary if indulging Trump's lies had, quote, any effect on your self-respect. I just wonder what you thought of that.
Well, you know, when you say self-respect, it's hard to put that in the same context with Donald Trump. He has obviously no self respect for himself. The things that he says publicly, and certainly when we're talking about NATO and being in all of these international meetings, it's embarrassing. It's just very embarrassing.
Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, as always, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
Thank you.
Coming up, Donald Trump gave us yet another example today of how he's willing to abuse the powers of the presidency to meddle in elections and reshape the rules of American democracy. That's next. Today, Donald Trump made his priorities crystal clear, and they do not involve making life easier for Americans. Trump started the day by announcing on social media that I will not sign the housing bill, which has been fully approved by Congress and sent to the White House in protest over the fact that the United States Senate is not capable of passing the Save America Act. So Trump is openly admitting that he's willing to hold up legislation with overwhelming bipartisan support. It passed the Senate 85-5 because enough Senate Republicans won't let him meddle in elections. In other words, Trump is holding housing affordability help for Americans hostage until he gets the election bill he wants. That housing package, formerly known as the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, is still expected to become law at 12:01 Saturday morning, unless Trump vetoes it. But that wasn't the only demand in Trump's post. Trump also demanded that Senate Republicans eliminate the filibuster to pass the SAVE Act, a Senate rule that many Republicans have spent years defending because what's good now might not be so good if Democrats win the Senate in November. But Trump, never a strategic thinker, wants those same Republicans to abandon that position because it stands in the way of him being able to meddle in the election. And that's not a coincidence. From his relentless lies about losing the 2020 election, to stoking the fantasy of overturning those results on January 6th, to railing about mail-in voting and who gets to vote, to starting a redistricting war and urging the elimination of black majority districts, Trump wants elections bent to his will. Today's threat is just the latest example, and maybe the clearest example of how far he's willing to go. But today's developments don't end there. CNBC reports that Trump ousted the 3 remaining members of the Election Assistance Commission with less than 4 months before midterm elections. Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who serves on the House Judiciary Committee and has been outspoken on voting rights, responded to the news in a tweet saying, "Let's stop pretending the Save America Act is about election integrity. If that were the case, this administration wouldn't be firing members of the Bipartisan Election Assistance Commission, the very people who help states run secure and fair elections. It is an attempt to suppress votes. And with the midterms around the corner, the timing speaks for itself." Joining us now, Richard Hasson. He is a professor of law and the director of the Safeguarding Democracy Project at UCLA School of Law. Professor Hasson, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. Trump has also removed the remaining commissioners of the Election Assistance Commission. How significant is that with the midterms just 4 months away?
Well, the first thing to note is that the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, like other federal agencies, helps states and localities run elections. We don't have a federal election body that actually runs elections, and the Election Assistance Commission doesn't do that. But what it does do is share best practices. It helps to figure out what are the best standards for software that is used to tabulate ballots. It helps give out grants. And so it does all kinds of positive things. And just how Trump has limited the role of the cybersecurity agency CISA in helping state and local election officials, this is also limiting the ability of state and local election officials to lean on the strength of the federal government to ensure that we continue to have free and fair elections.
What might Trump try to use the EAC for, should he fill it with loyalists and allies?
Right. So this is really the big question. So maybe all that he's trying to do is stop this agency from doing anything. in which case he would leave the post vacant. But he might try something else. He might either try to ram through the Congress some different appointees. He might even try to say that he could put appointees on the board without going through Senate approval. Or he might just say, thanks to the Supreme Court's recent rulings, giving the unitary executive theory greater strength, meaning that the president has more power over the executive branch, he might try and put out his own rules from the EAC. And we know one thing he cares about, because last year when he issued his first executive order on elections, he told the EAC to change the federal form that's used for voter registration to require documentary proof of citizenship, like a naturalization certificate or a birth certificate. That's also what's in the Save America Act. He might be looking for another way around this. And if he does that, he's sure to face some legal challenges.
So speaking of the SAVE Act, why do you think that has become such a priority for the president?
Well, one possibility is that he really believes that elections are being stolen. I can't get into Donald Trump's head, but I also think that maybe the end game here is he knows that there's a very good chance that he's going to lose control of one or both houses of Congress come next year. And if he's looking for a scapegoat, he can say, well, you know, we could have saved the elections if Republicans would have just come through and passed this law that would have stopped massive voter fraud. I don't think that's going to convince anyone except for those people already in his base who believe that elections are stolen. But I think now it's much more just a rhetorical thing than it is actually an attempt to try to get this legislation passed before November.
When you step back and look at all of this together, the push for the SAVE Act, gutting the EAC, what is the larger story that Americans should be paying attention to?
Well, in the past, the federal government has been the great protector of American elections. It was, after all, it was federal observers and registrars who were sent down to the South at the beginning of the Voting Rights Act to register Black voters who were disenfranchised. Now the federal government is the greatest risk that this country faces to free and fair elections in 2026. And that's a terrible thing to have to say. At best, what Donald Trump is doing is sowing doubts about the fairness and integrity of the election. At worst, he's trying to put a thumb on the scale and change the rules to make it harder for people to register and vote in this very important midterm election season that's coming up.
What worries you most, excuse me, about the November elections?
If the elections are not close, I think we'll be able to squeak through, even with what Trump is trying to do. I'm really worried about what would happen if we had very close election for control of Congress. Maybe it turns on a few seats in various states where there are close congressional races. And then is Donald Trump going to lean on election officials and elected officials? Is he going to try to seize ballots? I don't expect that there's going to be much on the front end. I don't think there are going to be ICE agents at the polls, but I do worry in a close election about how he might try to mess with the tabulation of ballots and the certification of winners, which is something that he tried to do back in 2020 when he tried to steal the election from Joe Biden.
Yeah, I remember that call to Georgia. All we need is 11,780 votes. Professor Rick Hasen, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. And coming up, Donald Trump handed Elon Musk a chainsaw to slash the federal government. Surprise, 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 surprise. The result wasn't efficiency. That's next. Donald Trump, who once played a hiring and firing guy on a reality TV show, empowered Elon Musk to take a chainsaw to the federal government. Well, now we're learning more about that so-called Department of Government Efficiency chainsaw under Donald Trump's poor management, specifically just how inefficient it was. A new report by Public Citizen finds the Trump administration has paid federal employees at least $11 billion and likely much more not to work. This total reflects only the lower end of estimated costs for the deferred resignation program inspired by Elon Musk in the Office of Personnel Management's infamous fork in the road email. The costs of this exercise in downsizing continue to mount and are replete with examples of poor planning, mismanagement, and financial inefficiencies and waste. The total costs of these terminations also include more than simply paying workers to stop working. They have had ripple effects throughout the government and on the American public. The utter incompetence of these mass firings by Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who seem to both lack the knowledge of what the federal workforce does and the attention span to carry out policy, led to chaos and underserved pain for those civil servants and their families. But ultimately, it also led to many of them having their terminations overturned later by the courts. And the report finds that at least 10 federal agencies actually rehired workers because the administration did not seem to understand the value or critical role of these employees in keeping the departments and offices they had worked for running. Trump and Musk's inept management had taxpayers paying for government services that were not being rendered because Trump and Musk sent those workers home. The report details what that $11 billion could have paid for, including 3.6 billion school lunches, a full year of daycare for more than 837,000 children, premium annual health care payments for 426,000 families, annual rent for 462,500 apartments, or annual in-state tuition for more than 928,000 students. Trump and Musk's ridiculous jaunt into the federal government cost Americans basic services that could have benefited them, a big waste of time and taxpayer money. That's the true cost of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Joining us now, Douglas Pasternak, Research Director of Public Citizens Trump Accountability Project. Douglas, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. Your report mentions that $11 billion is at the low end of the cost to taxpayers. Explain more about what your report found and how you were able to track and calculate all this.
Sure. All of these numbers come from the administration. We pulled them from the Office of Personnel Management, looking at their numbers that they had on one specific program, the Deferred Resignation Program. 140,000 federal workers took part in that program, and our analysis based on OPM's own data shows it cost the administration between $11 and $15 billion just to pay those workers to stay home. These are federal workers that have worked for the government for decades, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they're nonpartisan individuals, they just wanted to work. And they weren't only told to stay home, they were forbidden from working, and not just for a couple of weeks, but for many, many months. And what I found really astounding in the end, which you mentioned, is how ineffective and inefficient this program was. And, you know, as they say, the proof is in the pudding. And almost a dozen agencies have had to rehire workers that they either fired or coerced to take part in this program. So you're talking about workers at the Social Security Administration. So you're not getting out retiree benefits on time. You're talking about workers at VA hospitals that serve 9 million veterans. So veterans can't get the critical medical care they need on time, or mental health services. And you're also talking about a bunch of agencies with national security implications. The Department of Energy fired a bunch of people from the National Nuclear Security Agency. They maintain America's nuclear stockpile, something pretty important. So the Trump administration got rid of a bunch of folks and then realized, hey, maybe we should call them back because we actually need them. And more recently, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Administration put out an urgent call for more than 300 workers. They'd fired 1,000 last year. So it's really across the board. It touches every agency, and it touches people all across the United States.
Douglas, in your report, correct me, your report says taxpayers are still paying for this mismanagement as the program is still in effect this year to enforce more layoffs.
So the one program we looked at, and there are several of these programs, we looked at the biggest one called the Deferred Resignation Program. That program basically allowed workers, if they were going to resign from federal service, to resign, but then take months of leave at home, getting paid for it, even though they wanted to work. That program had several key points. It started in February or the end of January 2025. So that was one window for workers to take part. Then they did called the Deferred Resignation Program 2.0 in April of last year. But this year, what we found is that agencies are offering a 3.0 program where they're encouraging workers to basically retire, but to stay home through September of this year getting paid. So the costs keep mounting. And one other thing that's really important, you know, people may look at this and they're like, well, you have fewer federal workers. Of course, that's going to save money. I compare it to going into a local hospital. Someone just walked into a hospital and wanted to cut staff. They wouldn't randomly cut 50% of the staff or 25% of the staff. GAO has done several reports on this program, and they found it was not strategic, it was not well thought out, and some of the programs did workforce analyses of the staff they needed after they fired everyone or pushed them into the resignation program. So it really is astounding. And one other key point, the Yale University, their budget lab, did an analysis last year, and they found that if 22% of IRS workers were fired or let go, it would actually lead to a loss of $200 billion in revenue for the United States over a 10-year period. The IRS has so far, the number is up to 28% of the staff have left. So you're looking just at the IRS, you know, where we're losing money by engaging in this program.
You know, Douglas, we've got less than a minute left, but I have to ask you, what was your reaction when you calculated the list of services that could have been paid for with all this money we've been talking about?
Well, it's a lot of money. And, you know, the point of what we put out is there were so many things this could have been spent on that would have been so useful and so helpful for so many people. And again, you know, in so many different areas. It could have paid for almost 1 million students their annual tuition for a year. It could have paid for the annual salaries of 150,000 public school teachers. You know, across the board, I think people would think that's pretty important. So, you know, again, it was not efficient. It was not strategic. It was inept. It was Trumpian mismanagement at its worst.
Public Citizen's Doug Pasternak, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
Thank you.
Coming up, after the NATO summit, Robert Reich has a new theory about Donald Trump. He'll explain next. Donald Trump's NATO experience this past week was, in many ways, quintessential Donald Trump. His typical bull in a china shop presence at the annual summit delivered headlines like these. In the New York Times, Greenland, tariffs, NATO, and now soccer. Trump creates a new clash with Europe. NBC News writes, NATO survives another summit in the Trump era. And in Canada's National Post, after a tense Trump-disrupted NATO summit, it may be the last one for a while. Of course, Trump told a completely different story.
But I just, we just had our NATO meeting, and it was a great meeting. You probably heard it was a great meeting. There was a lot of love in that room, a lot of unity. And I don't think it could have been, Marco, what do you think? It couldn't have gone much better. Do you have a feeling as to what you just saw?
Very positive. A lot of unity, strength in that unity.
It was really good. Scott, what do you think?
Yes, sir. All the Europeans, they attributed you to saving NATO, and they want to do what they're supposed to do and do the right thing.
Yeah, there was something very special.
Our next guest, former U.S. Labor Secretary Robert Reich, had a realization watching the NATO summit, which he wrote about in an op-ed in The Guardian. What happened? It's important to understand the source of Trump's power. Trump's power comes from his willingness to violate all the norms, rules, and laws about how U.S. presidents are supposed to act, to do anything that helps him accumulate more wealth, power, and glory, and wreak vengeance on anyone who has tried to get in the way. The NATO presidents and prime ministers treated Trump with extraordinary deference because they're afraid of what he might do if he doesn't get what he wants. Trump isn't unethical, he's non-ethical. He isn't immoral, he's amoral. As president, his thuggery has paid off, at least for himself, but it also has damaged all sorts of institutions that the U.S. and the world have relied on, from NATO to FIFA to the U.S. Department of Justice, institutions based on the trust that no American president would ever do what he's done. He'll be remembered as the most powerful president the U.S. has ever had, but also the worst. Joining us now is Robert Reich, who served as Secretary of Labor under President Bill Clinton. He is a professor of public policy at UC Berkeley and co-founder of Inequality Media. Mr. Secretary, welcome to The Last Word. Your assessment of Trump as most powerful, most publicly shocking, sure, but most personally enriched by the presidency, yes. But Canada is not a state and Greenland isn't invaded. His tariffs are illegal. His public enemies are still in the U.S. Senate and the New York Attorney General's office and everywhere else. Say more about his power.
Jonathan, I think the power actually, the secret sauce, if you will, is that he is doing things that no president has ever done, and things that most people would say no president should ever done. I mean, since 2016, since he actually took over the White House, people come up to me, and they must come up to you and say, did you hear what he did? That whole notion about, did you hear what he did? Can you believe what he did? That is itself a source of power. Those NATO heads of state, I'm sure that they were a little bit worried. I mean, deers caught in the headlight in terms of what could he do now? What might he do if he doesn't get his way?
In your op-ed, you have a striking view of Donald Trump's effect on America. You write, think of a small town where people don't lock their doors or windows because of the unwritten rule that no one steals. Under these circumstances, the first thief to commit robberies operates at a huge advantage. He can effortlessly get into anyone's house. The first mover advantage disappears as soon as people catch on and start locking their doors and windows. When he's gone, all of us will be paying to clean up the mess. We'll have to buy an infinite number of locks for an endless number of doors and windows and spend huge amounts of our time installing them and then keeping them locked. So, Mr. Secretary, has Trump changed America permanently? Can we restore what he's taken?
Well, that's a tremendous question. I spent a lot of time worrying about it, thinking about it, as I'm sure you do and many other people do. I think we will be able to get back, but we may not be ever the same again, because trust is at the center of so many of our institutions, whether you're talking about NATO or FIFA or the Department of Justice. I mean, we trust that these institutions work as they are intended to work. We never assumed that an American president could wreak havoc on these institutions. And so that in terms of my analogy, yes, we're going to have to lock a lot of doors and windows. We're going to have to invest a great deal of our time and energy and maybe money in buying locks and creating a different kind of society that is less susceptible, less vulnerable to this kind of demagoguery.
Now, let's not forget Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said this at the World Economic Forum earlier this year.
For decades, countries like Canada prospered under what we called the rules-based international order. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition.
So, Secretary Reich, will Europe and the world ever be able to unlock their doors with America again?
Well, maybe it'll take another generation. I think my personal view, because I'm an optimist at heart, Jonathan, is that our next president is going to be elected because that president, whoever it's going to be, has so much integrity and so much humility and so much concern about institutional integrity that he helps mend the country. He helps bring back the institutions that have been so badly shattered. I think the public desperately wants that. They desperately need it. They want somebody who heads the government who they can trust. And whether you're MAGA or whether you're a progressive, I don't care who it is. This goes beyond ideology. It goes beyond partisanship. I think people are desperate for somebody who is authentic, but also cares about the country rather than about himself.
Not a partisan, perhaps a patriot. Former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. Tonight's last word is next. Today, the family of 18-year-old Mississippi college student Nolan Wells held an emotional press conference on the death of their son. Nolan Wells started his 4th of July heading by boat with a group of friends to a popular beach island on the Gulf Coast. Inexplicably, Nolan did not make the return trip back with them. His body was found a day later. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office said in a press release they are actively investigating his incident as a death, not a homicide. Today's civil rights leader, Reverend Al Sharpton, and lawyer Ben Crump said the family deserves answers.
He was one black with 3 young white men who happened to end up with his phone, happened to end up with his keys. Then there's just too many questions that they should not be closing the investigation.
To try to say, oh, we're suggesting it was just an accident or drowning, go ahead and move on. Well, they are not accepting it. They are not accepting it. They want to know that you have not taken the path of least resistance, that you have done a full, complete, thorough, impartial investigation.
Reverend Al Sharpton will join us tomorrow on the weekend with the latest on this important story. We will also be joined by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan and Nevada Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar on Trump's latest efforts to meddle in the election. That's tomorrow at 7 a.m. Eastern on the weekend, right here on MS Now.